So what we thought about doing was that we can't actually give our workshops the way we would normally do them. So we thought, well, what would be the most important things that we can kind of convey? So what we're going to talk about are some sort of principles, a bunch of principles that we use. We do have some practical tips and things that we're going to talk about. We're going to tell you a little bit about trip and mind-body love. Actually, I should do my slide here. We're going to tell you a little bit about trip and mind-body love and what we do. And then just really talk about the approaches that both of our organizations have that are very complementary. And then we've got a couple of scenarios which we put together just as a sort of a way to stimulate questions, just in case it was a room full of faces and no one was asking any questions. And so we don't need to stick to these scenarios. If you have other questions, we can definitely jump in. I'm very comfortable with you asking me questions at any point during the presentation. You good with that too? Okay, so just stick your hand up or jump in if you have a question, and hopefully we can make this useful and interesting. Okay, so just to set the scene right in the very beginning, when we talk about psychedelic crises, we really, you can sort of think of this as a very large conceptual framework that you can use to approach a situation. Come on in. Where you're dealing with a psychedelic crisis, either your own or your friends, or if you are in the habit of throwing parties or something like that, and you want to think about how you might manage them. So the first thing to think about is, what's a way of thinking about psychedelic crises? So the first thing, from the point of view of running sanctuaries and things, the first thing we see is that a lot of crises actually have nothing to do with the drugs that have been ingested. They have to do with people hurting for a long time without food, or not having drunk enough water, or maybe having drunk too much water. A lot of it is people not having enough sleep, or just being really overstimulated, especially in multi-day festivals, not having enough time for quiet, or else just not having enough space because there can be too many people around. So in terms of thinking about this, if you're dealing with someone in crisis, the very first thing you want to check is, does this even have anything to do with the drugs they've taken? Is it some even more basic kind of human need that hasn't been addressed? And then many of things which will present in a situation where someone is taking drugs really has to do with just some underlying problem that the person has, either an underlying physical or emotional problem or some sort of mental problem. And in that case, those can be, if it's physical, it might be easier to address. If it's mental or emotional, it might actually be a little bit trickier because you may be dealing with something much bigger than just the fact that somebody is high at the moment. Then obviously related to being high, people just might find the experience, the physical symptoms, or the sort of experiential feeling unpleasant or unexpected. Or they might just be too high or high for too long. And typically at multi-day festivals, the too high for too long part becomes quite a common thing we're dealing with. So in terms of thinking about what might be going on when someone presents with some sort of a problem, is really you need to think of it, is this something going on with their body? Are they complaining about some bodily sensation that they're finding very difficult to deal with? Does it have to do with sensory distortion or just their senses? It relates to the way they're actually perceiving the world, or sensory impulses are impacting on them. People can often be overwhelmed and stuff like that. Or does it have to do with mental or emotional health issues? So this may have to do with beliefs, delusions that they may have. Fear is a very sort of classic thing that often people don't recognize that what they're experiencing is fear, but they know that what they're experiencing is really unpleasant. And it's also common for people to talk about feelings of going crazy. And then there's the sort of the things that we like to think of as spiritual crises, where people may be experiencing ego death or some kind of spiritual awakening, or they may be encountering beings from another dimension or another planet or something like that. And actually, from the perspective of us at the Sanctuary, these are really important experiences, and actually we have a very specific way relating to the ones, particularly in terms of spiritual ones. Sometimes people remember or relive past trauma, so this could be something that happened to them, or it may be some sort of, I'm uncomfortable with the term, but racial memory or kind of archetypal memory where people may be reliving the experience of somebody in the Holocaust, or they would frame it to you as reliving a past life or something like that. It can be difficult to understand those sometimes if you don't actually just take at face value the story that you've been given. I'm experiencing a past life, this is what's going on. And then the most difficult to deal with the loops. And you may have come across these. This is where somebody will sort of say something and then say something else unrelated and then say something else unrelated, and then they go right back to the first thing they said, and they just go round and round, and there's nothing much you can do. So I'm going to hand over to Lisa. Lisa's going to tell you a little bit about the harm reduction model and peer education and TRIP.